r/NoSleep. Posted by u/Shane, star 93. I'm a mugger and housebreaker, but there are rules even we need to obey. Let me start by saying for the record that I'm not writing this to try and get anyone's approval, sympathy or forgiveness. I've made peace with what I do and who I am, so you can save your judgment for someone who cares. That being said, I rob people for a living. It isn't the glamorous life my foster parents wanted for me, but I'm also not some creeping monster or ghoul. I'm a person just like you. In this particular line of work there are the obvious dangers of police, guard dogs, alarm systems and the usual stubborn victims that think their $20 is worth putting up a fight. Then there are the less obvious dangers. Things that can't really be described. I'm not the most educated person in the world, which is part of the reason I'm going against my own criminal code of ethics and posting this on the internet, so that anyone can make sense of what I saw. I've been involved in this trade since I was in trade school when I first met up with Marcus and the rest of the guys. I won't bore you with the details of my life, but I'm pretty much the kind of person you'd expect to find in a career like this. They were a couple years older than I was at the time and really took me under their wing. At the time I was broke as hell trying to hold down a job as a car washer, and I'd be damned if I was going to live with my foster parents for 2 more years. Before long I began hanging out with these guys. One of the dudes, let's call him Marcus, did some time with me in juvenile hall, so he vouched for me with the others. Before long we had a little scheme going on in an upscale neighborhood about 15 minutes drive away from our own community. This was the kind of place where yuppies and other upper middle class suburbanites laid their heads. It was a place where they were frightened enough to pay for automatic gates and CCTV cameras but not proactive enough to form a community watch. Their loss. We usually confronted drunken, rich kids on their way home after a night of partying or the late night jog or a dog walker. These licks, robberies for you vanilla readers, were pretty easy. Most times we didn't even have to flash Marcus Beretta for them to give us everything. I can't quite explain it, but there's a certain thrill that comes with being able to intimidate someone into giving you their cash and valuables. Especially the kind of person that would have looked down on you otherwise. Anyways, the streets of this particular neighborhood were straight, crisscrossing avenues and streets with no curves on relatively flat land. Like you could stand at one end and see all the way to the other end if you looked carefully enough, meaning we could see the cops from a distance away, making our lives a lot easier. Not that police were a problem, as this area is relatively unpatrolled. One of the biggest problems we had was just a general drop in activity. On some nights the place could be a fucking ghost town. I mean dead silence, the lights to the houses and apartments perfectly off, with black buildings and silence as far as the eye could see along the streets. It was creepy. I meant you knew people were home, it's just, what were they doing in there? I don't know. Coming from a neighborhood like ours where there was always a television set on, loud music, a police siren and the occasional gunshot, it was kind of a shock that people actually lived like this. On one of my first licks Marcus explained to me that while this neighborhood is relatively quiet, sometimes things happen that can be dangerous, and made it a rule for all 3 of us who were part of our clique to be sober and alert anytime we hit the streets. I never understood the reason for this, but the older guys seemed to have a clearer idea than I did. I just followed their lead. I remember one night, we split up the way we did. With 2 guys at the top of the street and Marcus and I at the bottom. The 2 guys at the top served as spotters. They would hide behind a tree, a dumpster or parked car and tip us off via text when a potential victim was walking our way, while Marcus and I did the actual robbing. This night, we all were in position when I got a text from Bubbles, one of the spotters, that an old man was walking towards us. He also said the guy looked drunk out of his mind because of how he walked. It was unusual to get old people out at this hour, but I didn't think too much of it. Before long Marcus and I saw the silhouette of the old man lumbering towards us. He appeared to have on a plain white tuxedo and staggered from side to side. Bubbles wasn't joking, this boy is fucking gone, I whispered to Marcus. I half expected to hear a chuckle, but Marcus just stood there with his hooded parka on staring at the old man, his hand still clutching the pistol in his jeans. Get back in the drains, he ordered. If we move that far back we won't get him in time. Get back, he said more forcefully. I complied and we fell back into a large storm drain and waited for the man to pass. It felt like forever hiding in that cramped, stink train, but eventually the man passed us, walking as if controlled by an unseen puppet master, with one knee rising as high as his chest in front the other. Still in the drain, Marcus waited for the old man to be out of audible distance before he finally whispered something to me. I didn't tell you before because I wanted you to see one for yourself, but this neighborhood has had some experiences in the past. Not everything or every person you see here is good game. Sometimes you need to wait and see for yourself. Now try to bear in mind that Marcus was about 19 at the time of him telling me this. I knew a bit about him because his cousin and I did juvie together a few years ago. He had already done time for aggravated robbery and beating up his stepfather with a rake. He was the most solid guy I knew, but in that moment, in the storm drain surrounded by rat shit and leaves, I could see he looked genuinely scared. What do you mean? Like some of them pack heat? I asked curiously. His eyes still wide reflected the street lights. Nah. Just. Some of these people aren't what they seem. Shit, like I couldn't explain it, but after dark this neighborhood is a different place. I don't understand, I said softly. He shot me an annoyed look. Look man. That guy with the white suit. He isn't really a person. I don't think he is. Ever so often I see him walking up and down these streets the same way. If you get a good look at him you would see his face isn't right. Like his eyes and mouth. Shit. His features seem too far apart sometimes. I took a good look at Marcus to see if he was fucking with me. He was never the kind of guy to pull a prank on a job like this, so I trusted what he was saying as the truth. In all honesty, this entire neighborhood had a weird vibe to it from the first night we came here, but I didn't say anything because I didn't want to seem like a pussy. I was the new guy after all. I eventually dropped the conversation just as Marcus called Bubbles and the other spotter at the top of the street. Tighten it up out there. The guy you told us about was white tux. Give us a heads up on some real people next time, fool. Real people? What the fuck did he mean by that? Before long I found out. After about an hour we got another text from Bubbles. This time it was a frantic one. Tall man S coming down the road, duck M, Marcus. Bubbles wasn't the most literate person, but on his best days at least I could understand his messages. This time I couldn't decipher what the fuck he was trying to say. I showed Marcus the message and he pushed me further into the storm drain. Shut the fuck up. Before I could ask a question I could see it through the grating of the drain. I wished I was high off some codeine because the bullshit I saw next would be a lot easier to explain. About 10 feet tall, I fucking saw my foster father tiptoeing down the avenue in front of us. Only it had the biggest mouth I ever saw. My mouth fell open. A hoarse croak came out of my throat as I saw this thing doing a cartoonish tiptoe down the street, looking from side to side. I get shivers just thinking about it as I write it right now. How was that even possible? Obviously he wasn't my foster father. My foster dad was probably drunk off 40s and under the covers of our apartment 15 minutes away. But that thing had him down to a T, complete with the dirty flannel shirt he wore tonight. Marcus. What the fuck? He just raised his finger to his lips, until the thing was out of sight. We stayed in the storm drain for another 5 minutes in silence before he finally spoke. That's what I'm talking about. Things like that happen ever so often. My eyes still wide from what I just saw. Marcus grabbed the phone from me and called Bubbles. Within a matter of minutes we fell back to our car that we parked on the outskirts of the neighborhood and got out. The drive home was silent. But I had to know. Before I could even speak, Marcus replied, I don't know what they are. They usually don't come out very often, maybe twice, 3 times a night for the most. But it's rare. Bubbles and Jamal, the other spotter, looked at me in the rearview mirror of the car. How did it look like my foster father? I asked. Marcus looked confused. Your foster father? What do you mean? I described what I saw to him and he argued, nah, it looked like a giant clown. But then Bubbles interrupted. You both wrong. It looked like a giant dog. Jamal just sat quietly in the front passenger seat. That's when we all realized that we each saw something differently. The guys dropped me off home, careful to make an extra circle around the block just in case, Marcus said. I've been going to school and work as usual since then. I've been asked by the other guys to come out on a few more licks. To be honest, the thrill of robbing is fun and the money is easy, but I don't know anymore. Maybe if we switch up, what do we do it? But for now I don't know. I just don't know.